This is a recording of a Q&A from Cardiff Animation Festival 2024. It followed a screening of Kensuke's Kingdom and was hosted by CAF team member Nia Alavezos.
Hi. What a film. Yay, well done, everyone. You guys should be really proud. It's fantastic.
Thank you.
So, can you please start by introducing yourselves and your role on the film so they can know how awesome you are?
My name is Neil Boyle, and I'm one of the two directors of Kensuke's Kingdom.
I'm Neil Martin. I'm the lead compositor.
And I'm Michael Shorten. I was the art director on the film.
Nice. And really quickly, this is the most important question of this entire Q&A. It's an icebreaker. If you had one film to take with you on a desert island, what would it be and why? And I will not accept Kensuke's Kingdom. I'm very sorry.
Damn, that's my one gone.
Hey. Yeah, you go first.
Let's think. Well, I'm a sort of child of the 80s and 90s, and maybe I would take the Goonies.
Nice.
Yeah, and proper adventure movie similar to this. I mean, not similar, but I also the lead character in the Goonies is also called Michael. So maybe I'm only interested in films where the lead character is called Michael.
Hey, that's okay. Very good.
I thought about an obvious one would be Castaway for tips.
Yeah.
But maybe like a film that's in the middle of a sequel, so that you hadn't seen the last one and you're dying to get off the island to see it. So like June 2 or something. But yeah.
Nice.
Yeah, this is a tough one. I am going to go for Edward Scissorhands because it's one of my favourite films ever. And spoiler alert, if anyone hasn't seen it, at the end of the film he kind of ends up on his own, looking back upon the love of his life and the family he's been with, and in his isolation he makes all these beautiful sculptures out of ice of what he's experienced. And if I was stuck on a desert island away from my loved ones, I would also be making little sculptures and paintings and drawings so that I always had some company. So that's my answer.
That's very good. Thank you all. It's very solid. Fantastic. Now we can start with the important questions. I'm sorry, everyone. So I've split everything up into different segments. So we're going to start talking about the early film and the script, the adaptation from the novel. So when and how did you all get involved in the film?
I'm first. I got involved in this about 300 years ago. It's taken at a phenomenal amount of time. Films do take a long time to finance, but Kirk and I first became co-directors, became the directors of the film 11 years before it was finished. And it took 8.5 years to raise the money, and then it took us 2.5 years to actually make. So it was, we were doing this longer than Michael was stuck on a desert island, anyway, put it that way.
Then I suppose I became involved next. I think for me it was just an exciting email one day from one of the producers at Lupus, and they said that Neil and Kirk would like to speak to me, so I obviously jumped at the chance, and I think we spoke the next day, and we looked at some mood boards and the pitch Bible, and I was sort of, blown away by the sort of the ambition of it, and all of the imagery was just very sort of right up my street, and so yeah, I bit their hand off, and the interview obviously went well because here I am.
He was very sensible. We knew that, but massively talented and very sensible, which is exactly what we needed.
And then we were off then.
So I was on Ethel and Ernest, Cloth Cap, and then we finished that, and then went straight on to the promo trailer for Kensuke's Kingdom. And then after that, I went through to Lupus and worked on We're Going on a Bear Hunt. And then 2 years later, I think it may have been, we got the call from Lupus asking, do you want to work on Kensuke's Kingdom? So it started from there, and then I think it was about a year later, that's when we actually started working on it after that, yeah.
Nice.
And sorry, just hijacking, but just to say, I don't know if there are there any crew from Bumpy Box or anyone?
Yay!
Yay, well done. I just wanted to say, while we're here in Wales, the tremendous support that we had from our brilliant crew in Wales, people at Bumpy Box and to Film Cymru, who really supported us. So Welsh people feel extremely proud of your contribution to this film.
Yay, well done.
Give yourself a round of applause.
Would you like to use the questions?
No, I'm sorry. That's the last
Okay,
time. I
okay.
apologize.
Nice,
I will
that's
sit
okay.
quietly in a corner now.
Thank you. My next question, what initially drew you to the film and story? Were you always hoping to get involved in a film like this?
I certainly wanted to be directing a feature for a long time. I mean, kind of who doesn't? And I'd done short films and things like that and commercials. But Kirk and I didn't choose this film. This film came to us through Sarah Radcliffe, who was the main producer on it. And if you think we were working on it a long time, she was working on it for about another 6 or 7 years before we became involved, for our 11 years, because initially it was going to be a live-action film, was the idea. And it became way too complicated to have a little 11-year-old boy half drowning in the sea and trying to get orangutans to act and all this kind of stuff. So she came up with the idea of making it an animated film and approached Kirk and myself, and we did cut a long story short, we did a kind of pitch on it, a little 10-minute thing with very little drawing but loads of images we'd taken off the internet, and music, because that's very important to us. And it was like a kind of mood video of how we saw the film, and Sarah loved that, and she just said, "You're hired," and stayed very loyal to us all through all those years while the money was being raised.
And for me, it was a complete no-brainer, because Neil's obviously very humble, but he is an industry legend. I'm sure you all know Neil. And so the thought of working alongside Neil and obviously Kirk, who I came to respect and admire very much, it was an absolute no-brainer. And at the time, I remember I'd been away from animation for a few years. I was actually working on His Dark Materials here in Cardiff, which is where
That's right.
where
We
you
know
and
each other,
I met.
yeah.
And so the thought of getting back into animation, especially traditional animation, which is my sort of first love, alongside two incredible people, was it was too good an opportunity to turn down, really. So it was
Nice.
easy choice.
Nice. Awesome.
Yeah. I was working on a CG animation, Shane the Chef, and when this came up, and my first project I ever worked on was The Illusionist, so I was in animation, so I'd loved animation since then. And to go from compositing on live action, which is removing green screens, cables, people in mirrors, things like that, then animation is a lot more creative, and you feel more part of it. So that's as soon as that came along and you asked, absolutely jumped at the chance. Yeah.
And actually thinking about it, all the crew were, the animation director and the assistant animation director, Peter Dodd and Denise Dean. We first met up in Edinburgh working on a film called The Illusionist, which is actually where me and Neil first met.
Yeah.
So all of the crew, all of the sort of the leads, I was sort of familiar with. So all the puzzles sort of,
Nice.
all the puzzle pieces fit. It was
That's fantastic.
no-brainer. Yeah.
Nice. Next question. One of the things I loved about the film was the lack of dialogue, as you allowed the story to breathe and grow visually without being weighed down by the dialogue. Was that a choice you made in a creative process as you worked on adapting the book to the screen?
Yes, removing the dialogue is like a passion that I've always had all my life. I did a short film, which some of you may have seen, called The Last Bell, which is almost without dialogue as well. And I love that. And when I started working with Kirk, he loved that approach as well. And I think we both like it because it's kind of pure cinema, in our opinion, in that you strip the dialogue. You get back to how they did it in the 1920s and before, when film was really universal. And you could shoot a film in Hollywood and it would be playing anywhere in the world because there was no talking, so language didn't get in the way of it. And so to strip the dialogue out is anyway a choice that I think both Kirk and I will always make. But the fabulous thing about this script, when we read it, is it's all about people who, for various reasons, can't communicate. So apart from the dialogue at the beginning within the family, once we're on the island, obviously Kensuke can't speak English, Michael can't speak Japanese, and none of the human characters, because this isn't a Disney film, can talk. So none of the animals, can sing and dance and so on. So they can't communicate. So we had to find body language, facial expressions, using the music, using the color, production design and everything to tell the story. The theory being, slightly long answer, sorry, but the theory being that when you take the dialogue, if you have a scene and a character says, you know what, I feel sad, they've just told you. But if you watch someone and you look at their body language, you look at how they move and how fast they're moving, and the context and that it's a dreary day and what the music's doing, you begin to piece it together. And we always kind of feel as an audience that you have to do a teeny bit more work when there isn't dialogue there, because you're not just being told what's going on, you're having to kind of piece it together. And as an audience member, I love that, because I'm sort of drawn into the film a little bit more, trying to piece together what these characters are feeling. So it totally made sense for this film.
Nice. What other challenges did you face adapting a book to the screen?
Along the same lines that Michael Morpurgo, and it's a brilliant novel and much loved, and we didn't want to mess with it too much. We messed with it a little bit, but but Michael Morpurgo was very supportive in letting us adapt. So there's a lot of inner dialogue going on in Michael's head, which again you can't do in cinema. You can't, unless you want a voiceover going through the whole film. So again, it went back to the visuals of finding a way of explaining very complex emotions without anyone talking or doing dialogue. That really is the hardest. Second hardest thing about this film, definitely, once we decided to go the silent route, was how to compress this much time into an 84-minute film. Well, 4 minutes, so that's credit, so an 80-minute film. And when we did our first rough, I don't know how many people are animation people, but you do something called an animatic. So you draw storyboards in black and white, no animation yet, quite simple drawings, and then you cut them on a timeline, on an edit, and add rough sound effects, rough dialogue, if not your actual actors, music from other films, and you get a feel of how the film is playing. And Kirk and I and our storyboard team have worked on that for quite a few months, and the first time we ran it, it felt like Michael had been on the island for about 3 days. It was the weirdest thing, and we were going crazy, going, God, how are we going to make this work? So we went back in and analysed it, and then particularly with Mike's help at this point, we looked at it and think, okay, what extra sequences do we need? What extra clues do we need? I mean, at the end, you see Michael planting a seed, and then that seed turns into a little shoot and then into flower. And so there are little things subconsciously that are telling you time is passing. But we worked with Mike very much, and then Neil afterwards, and then our grader after that, to get times of day going on into the film. So we said, okay, this sequence must be morning, it's dawn, light, this will be lunchtime, this is a sunny day, this is an overcast day, and subliminally, while you're watching all these different things pass by, you suddenly feel like months and months and months and seasons are passing. And boy, that was hard work. But we got there in the end. Remember all that, Mike? That was tough.
Yeah.
But it works.
Yeah, sorry. Yeah.
Nothing? Yeah, that's okay. Nice. We're going to move on to funding, everyone's favorite topic. Could you explain a little bit about your journey working with Film Cymru on the film and seeking additional funding and production partners?
Yeah, sorry, guys. I'm doing a lot of...
No, you're, more
I'll
questions
shut
are
up
coming.
later
More
on.
questions
But
are coming.
funding is sort of... It's a house of cards. So part of the reason it took so long to get the money together, to sort of simplify it, what happens is that you have lots and lots of partners. You'll have a French partner and a Welsh partner and a Luxembourg partner, and they put a pot of money in, and their crews, in some cases, like the Welsh crew and the Luxembourg crew, their people will spend that money in their country to help you make the film. In the case of French money, we had French money, but not a French crew. That's just money we could spend in the UK or wherever. But all these different people put money in, and so you put up a card and you get another card, and then you balance another card and you get another one, and all this has to be done before the end of the film tax year. And right at the last minute, year one, somebody would say, I don't know, we had a flop last year, we can't afford to finance anything this year, we're pulling out. And that card gets pulled out, and then your whole thing goes, and that's it, you've lost everyone, because you need every single piece together. So the next tax year, you start all over again. And, always at the last minute, something would happen, or somebody would pull out, or there wasn't enough money. So essentially it is, spinning plates, building a house of cards, however you would like to call it. It's a very delicate balancing thing. And then finally, it all came together, and we could make the film, and it was COVID. There you go.
Wow. Are you able to... Oh, sorry, go ahead.
I was going to add, it was because of Creative Wales and Film Cymru, their support and their finances, and which got us, which brought the film to Cardiff for us. it's a hard industry at the moment. It's very competitive, and they helped us stand out. So it was it was down to them getting it to Bumpy Box. Yeah.
Fantastic. How
And
long?
we loved Film Cymru's notes because they always just went, "We love it. Keep going." And we're like, "Yeah, that's the kind of notes we want." So
Yes, I love Film Cymru. I've done 2 films with them. They're the best.
they are brilliant. Yeah.
Yes. How long did you spend seeking additional funds? Because you mentioned the House of Cards collapsing.
From my point of view, it was the 8.5 years that I was involved in financing. It took, but then COVID. Hey,
Yes.
that was interesting.
Are you able to disclose the budget?
Probably not, actually. I
fair
don't know why people are funny about it. I mean, let me put it this way. All European films of this type fall between the 6 billion and 10 million euro budget, and so did we. But for some reason, I don't think I'm allowed to say.
That's fair enough. You gave a good answer, though. Thank you. Nice. We're going to move on to production. Can you all explain your creative process when approaching a new project? What are some of the first steps to building your perfect vision? Start.
Yeah, I mean, it's like, any project, it always just sort of starts with the blank page. You just have those early discussions. I seem to remember at the very start, I think Neil and Kirk, they had some sketches on napkins.
Hello?
Can I go on this? Hello? Yeah, you had some sketches on napkins. I remember that you'd done for the sort of treehouse and the and the Peggy Sue. So it's sort of we're having those conversations, and and then I basically start sketching and trying to sort of flesh out these locations, and it's constant back and forth. Obviously, we're all remote at this point in the film, so it's sort of it's just it's sending an email and we're getting this dialogue going. We're speaking every day over the phone or over Zoom, and then you're bouncing around the film, so you're not really focusing on one particular location at that point. I think we happened to start on the Peggy Sue, but it was just a case of trying to get a broad feel for the whole production, all the main sort of beats. It's all digital now. I haven't put pencil to paper that much over the last few years. You just sort of generally work digitally so they can kind of quickly iterate. And you're sort of simultaneously trying to build the idea of the locations and what they need from the story, and but alongside that, you're trying to, especially for a brand new project like this, you're sort of trying to create like a style and build a language, and you're trying to figure out how you might then take it into production. So in those early stages, it's sort of just a little small team of you, and you're just bouncing all these ideas around. You move from sort of the black and white sketches to the color concepts, and you just have a few sort of key images that you can latch onto, and then you sort of start to flesh it out a bit from there. And and before you know it, you're sort of you're into production. I did for some of the locations. I've started. It was around about the time I started working on Kensuke, actually. I hadn't done it that much previously, but I started introducing sort of 3D design into my workflow. So I would block something out, like especially more man-made locations like the Peggy Sue, block it out roughly, so then you can utilize some of the the structure and the perspective and the light and everything from those environments, and then you can sort of sketch and build over the top. We did the same with the treehouse. I think we sort of blocked out something in 3D, and that's also useful for the later departments to be able to have something solid to work with, especially because we had all these water interactions. It was useful for sort of Neil and his guys to have a sort of something structural to work with at that point. And I mean, we obviously had all the jungle environments, which were very complex and a different sort of creative challenge. We were building up lots of different layers of foliage, but then that would feel sort of too noisy and busy, so we had to figure out a way of staging it clearly for the characters. And so, every location had its own sort of challenges, but it's just a constant dialogue, and you just hope that you've sort of got all your ducks in a row before production starts, because at that point it's like a runaway train and you got no chance then. So it was exciting challenge.
Yeah, it was the same for me. It was we had the meeting way back then with all with all threes, and just asking what's the style they're going for. What do you want real action, live action footage in there, or do you want it all to be particles? How's the shadows going to be looking like? Do you want shadows? The lighting on the characters. Is there any textures on the characters? These things. Just finding out what you're after and what the style you want to look at, and then we would get the kind of style scripts, I suppose you call them, from Mike, and then, as you say, using the Peggy Sue model and the treehouse. I mean, I don't know how many versions you must have seen of the treehouse at the start, and I don't think it's
a lot.
Yeah, I think we're on version 100 and something by then. That was just the first couple of months. Yeah, just to test things, how things would look, so that when we got to that point, we knew how they could paint it and what's the best way of splitting it up. Are we going too much? Do we need to make it simpler, or is it too simple and we need more, detail? So that's the kind of the ground there. I mean, it changes as it goes along.
And, it's important to say as well, like what a small team we were as well. It's just such a core little team of people trying to figure these things out, like often on huge productions.
Yeah.
You've sort of, you come up with these ideas and then it sort of goes to a department. You've got an army of people working on it. We did have an army of people, but it was a very small army. Yeah. It's a very small, dedicated army. But it does change the dynamic, especially when you're trying to create a feature film with such small numbers. It was it's tricksy.
And just as you're talking, I'm glancing at this. I mean, this is a great example, just to put the scale of it in your head, and this isn't me sort of banging our drum, but it's just the amazing thing about animation in general, but this film in particular in CinemaScope, is that an image like that, I mean, look at how many leaves there are, even though some of them are deliberately quite impressionistic, because again, Kirk and I like very much the kind of matte painting style, Mary Poppins, if you like, the old, slightly goes painterly towards the edges and off into the distance. But there's 1,200 shots in this film, and every single shot starts with white paper or white canvas. So every speck of sand, every cloud in the sky, every tree, every leaf on that tree, somebody somewhere's had to think about it and colour it and paint it and light it. And it's a heck of a lot of work. So these guys worked phenomenally hard in their teams, for which I can only say again, thank you very much.
Well done. What were some of the overall design inspirations for the film, from live action to animation? You mentioned Mary Poppins. Are there any other ones?
Yeah, funnily enough, not a lot. Not people say, well, animation influence, and there's not a lot of animation influence in this. But when Kirk and I first read the script, I remember saying to him, "It's got to be CinemaScope." Well, I like CinemaScope anyway. We were sitting in a little cafe in Soho, figuring out what this film might be. And I said, it reminds me of Sergio Leone. I don't know how many people here know like The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly and movies like that. But these big CinemaScope images with a little dehydrating Clint Eastwood, going through the desert or something like that. And it felt that you needed that width of screen and that size and the little figures within the landscape. The landscape being as important as the characters, or the island being another character in effect in the film. So Sergio Leone, and then obviously David Lean, because I'm such a David Lean nut, and lots of live action influence, I would say, on us, probably more than animation.
Yeah, I think that they were sort of the main touch points. Any sort of movies that were sort of based on in-jungle environments. We were looking at all those, I think.
You're like Poltergeist.
I've got some strange effect on this microphone. Can you still hear me? Okay. And stylistically, I mean, obviously, because it was traditional animation, I was constantly sort of aware of trying to find that marriage between the backgrounds and the characters. So I was, looking at 2D animation, like, Princess Mononoke and Arrietty, anything that was sort of heavily based with sort of lots of, greenery and jungle. But obviously, stylistically, we're very different to those films. We had a taste to try and do something a bit different. And so we were leaning towards live action references a lot. I remember one I sort of kept looking back on a lot is a Martin Scorsese film called Silence, which is based on a remote Japanese island in the 17th century. And some of the sort of, the environments of that with the fog rolling in, and that was a constant sort of pushing that towards the artists to reference. But yeah, lots of mainly live action stuff actually. Yeah.
Nice. Any inspiration for you for your comp?
I mean, it was mostly just. I think Kirk had quite a very strong look that he was going after. So at the start, when we were, doing the R&D on the first few comps that we could do, was to see, like, basically, do it first, show them so they got something to, not pick apart, but you've got something to work from, because sometimes on some scenes they weren't quite sure what they, you could go any way. You could do it 101 ways, but if you just do it and then you can then, build on that and take things away, add things, move things. So it's, I think Kirk was, and yourself as well. You were quite specific.
No. I mean, it's interesting as two directors, because people often ask, is that difficult? But Kirk and I very much agree on the story points, and we would sort of thrash that out and get to agreement. But my background is more drawing. Basically, I'm a character animator myself, or have been for years. So I draw. I get more involved in that side of things, and storyboarding, thumbnailing out shots a little bit more than Kirk, because Kirk actually can't draw. I mean, he admits that he doesn't. He had some interesting storyboards, but he found a way of doing it with photos and stuff. But it was good. But Kirk's background, he's a fabulous compositor. So he's used to painting with light in his own imagery. So he definitely had far more of a influence on that side than I did. Yeah.
Nice, thank you. Next question. My two favorite segments in the film were the montage sequences. The first with the family traveling via logbook sketches, and then the beautiful watercolor flashbacks of Kensuke. Can you talk more about the inspiration behind those two moments and why you went for the style change?
Did you have something?
I keep dipping out. It's been about a year since I've seen it. When we first had a screening in London, when it was completed, I was surprised, obviously being so closely involved with the film, how emotional I got again watching it this time. And I remember the travelogue sequence was there from very early doors. I think you'd sort of put something like that together even before I started, and it largely remained intact. I think there were some sort of changes to it, but that was such a core part of the idea, was this, everything's great and we're off and we're traveling, and then, the little sort of the paper boat idea. I mean, it's just, it's all Neil and Kirk's genius. And then the flashback sequence was, even though I remember doing it, I was surprised how emotional I got watching it again. So it's nice. I think a lot of the reference there was Hiroshiga. We were looking up lots of different Japanese sort of masters, and Hiroshiga in particular had just this amazing sort of, elegant way of, painting landscapes in particular and animals, and obviously that was a challenge to try and replicate a Japanese master, not being Japanese masters ourselves. That was it was really, really beautiful.
I mean, things like the Nagasaki sequence came out of the fact, again, because we would strip the dialogue out, that we couldn't have that kind of what we used to call Karate Kid 2 dialogue. Me remember when, long time ago, it'd just be awful and it wouldn't work. So we had to find visual equivalents. And the idea that Michael and Kensuke could communicate through art, literally, because they both, Michael's drawing a logbook and Kensuke's has an art room, it turns out, that we discover, was something that Kirk and I put in there into the script, working with Frank Cottrell-Boyce very early on, so that they could communicate in a way. And so it seemed natural to us when we were trying desperately to figure out how do we explain why Kensuke's on the island and what's happened to his family, and why the orangutans have sort of become his new family, because he doesn't have a family anymore. It's quite a complex thing. So that all evolved out of thinking, okay, well, yeah, obviously. Actually, we started thinking about, because the little ink, we knew he'd be painting, and we originally came up with a sequence where he dipped the ink in and you were kind of in the water jar, and the ink actually swirled around and formed the images that showed his backstory. And it got a little bit complex, it got a little bit tricksy and a bit show-offy, and also way too expensive. Well, most importantly. Never mind the art, we couldn't afford it. So we were talking about it, and I said, this is silly, he just does paintings, so let's just have the paintings come to life. And from that whole thing, I had remembered, this is funny how just watching movies, I was chatting to Kirk one day, and there's a film that Ridley Scott made years ago called 1492, Christopher Columbus film. And at the end of the film, Christopher Columbus's son is saying, he's now an old man, and his son is saying, what happened to you on your adventures as you travelled the world? And he says, this is Gerard Depardieu, he goes, I remember. And there's a pause, and his son's holding the nib, and the nib just goes, and there's a little blob of ink on the paper, and it fades out, and it's the end of the film. So it's like the beginning of his memoirs. And I loved that blob of ink, and I was chatting to Kurt going, God, the blob of ink, if we have it on a paintbrush, then we literally can show the bomb. That's when the art transmogrifies, and it becomes the bomb, and the spreading of the ink becomes the devastation. And then we got into the covering up his wife and his child's face, and everything fell into place. And it took weeks and weeks and weeks of batting around between us to get there. But when we finally had that idea, we went, oh God, that's so obvious. It's so simple. Why did that take so long?
Yeah.
So,
and the sound is so effective as well, with the explosion, and you have that moment of silence.
Wow. Next question. You mentioned beginning the production during COVID. Can you explain some of the initial challenges and obstacles you faced working remotely?
Well, it's like everyone, wasn't it? We were all in the same boat, and I suppose the difference was that we had sort of literally just got together. Well, no, I suppose, I think we'd just got together around, it was a sort of middle of 2020, I suppose. So I think it was probably a good sort of year and a half before Neil and Kirk and I met face to face. We literally had to do the whole thing. I know obviously in lots of other workplaces it was the same thing, but I suppose people have met before and they're long-time colleagues, whereas this was a brand new project. We were all sort of new to working with each other, and we'd just gotten into this. We had just gotten used to sort of seeing each other in our little Zoom windows. And I remember, I think the first time we actually sort of met in person then was probably it must have been well over a year in, and maybe it was a Christmas party or something, I don't know. But I remember thinking how tall Kirk was, because I hadn't. He's not here, so you don't know, but he's quite tall. He's 6'2", 6'3", something.
Because I'm relatively tall, but I look short in photos next to him. So he's about 6'3" or something.
He's a tall guy. I just remember thinking, it just completely changed it. But it was, it was like us all really. But we all the usual sort of daily Zoom meetings and Slack and all those things. So,
does anyone remember? I don't know if anyone here was working on productions or anything at the time, but how odd it was when we came out of lockdown, and you actually saw people you've been looking at in Zoom all that time, but in 3 dimensions. And it was actually kind of odd. Your brain, I don't know if you remember this, but your brain, I was going, whoa, it's like you're seeing noses come towards you, and this is odd, and I didn't realise you were that tall and that short. But it helped us, I have to say, probably, with all the roller coaster of getting the funding done, ironically, the COVID thing probably pushed us into production a teeny bit quicker, because we had BFI money behind us, and the BFI were very supportive. And when COVID hit, I think everyone suddenly realised, my God, we can't shoot anything with real actors, in a real situation. And we were one of the projects that were very, very ready, pretty damn ready to go. And they kind of hit the button and said, okay, go, because at least it was something that could be made in a lockdown situation. So ironically, and then I went online with all the crew saying, we're all isolated in our bedrooms, and we're making a film about people who are isolated on a desert island. So fantastic, channel that.
And then even when it sort of subsided and we were able to start working together again, we would just become so ingrained in doing things the way we'd done things, to try and sort of shift the production then to doing it in-house, and it was actually quite tricky then, because we just got so used to doing it a certain way. But so we carried on more or less like that till the very end then, which was another a year or so and beyond.
Wow.
I mean, a week before the first lockdown, we all started working from home, and then we've never gone back. We're still all working from home. Our bumpy box, just working. Yeah, it's been fine. It's been grand. It's got its own problems as well, but it's but the change into it was actually easier technically, although I had nothing to do with the technical side of it, so I can't really. I just said, "Oh, it's all working now," but I don't know if Toke, our technical director, was working all around the clock to getting all the things working in the background.
Yeah, it is sort of very much a film of COVID, actually, isn't it? This because there was none of those sort of water cooler conversations where you just arrive one day and you think, "Oh, I was just thinking about this last night. What do you think?" and blah blah blah. There was less of those impromptu conversations. It was, as everyone knows, it's sort of like if you needed to discuss something, then you need to arrange a meeting, and it's, like you say, it had pros and cons to it. But
there's nothing worse than saying 4 p.m. It's 4 p.m. and you will be creative until 5 p.m. And it just doesn't work that way because we're used to bubbling ideas over in the pub, or wherever.
Yeah, more pub time would have been nice.
I agree. My next question is for you, Michael. What were some of your favorite environments and elements of the film you helped design?
Well, the favourite for me to design was, I think without a doubt, the treehouse. Just because it was, it was a proper design challenge where you get the joy of having to really put yourself into the shoes of a character, I have a funny feeling, I don't know, was there ever a point when Kensuke, we were thinking maybe you wouldn't be in a treehouse, it was like a cave or something? Was that an early idea, or maybe it's even in the book?
No, Frank had, even before Kirk and I came on board, Frank, in his first screenplay, thought the cave was a bit, because it's a cave in a book, he lives in a cave, and Frank thought it was a bit kind of dingy.
Yeah, that's it.
So he created the treehouse.
That's right. Okay, so it was. I think it was decided it was going to be a treehouse early on. So then it's a case of, right? Okay, so how high up is he, and is it one tree or is it spread across multiple trees? How did he build it? What are the materials he built with? And you have to think about, constantly thinking of the story. So how do you stage it for the story beats and the needs of the story and the character? I remember researching and finding this great channel on YouTube called Primitive Skills. It was this guy who basically just lives in the Indonesian jungle and films himself doing all these incredible things like building these shelters and water supplies. And so every new artist that started, I said, "You got to watch this guy, he's amazing." And so we put a lot of that into Kensuke because obviously he's got his little kitchen and he's got his, he's got his running water and his shower. And then there was also the challenge of, at the start you have to think about this treehouse needs to be it can't be a treehouse. It needs to be concealed to Michael and also to the audience at the start. We can't know that until that sort of grand reveal. And then obviously you've got the art room as well. So you're thinking about how does Kensuke make this paper and how does he make his ink and brushes? So you're constantly trying to put yourself in the shoes of the character and thinking, what would I do apart from die immediately, probably. It was a lot of fun, that one. It was a sort of the art room in particular. I remember we sort of had conversations about where the sun's setting, because we wanted to make sure that when the characters move into the art room, it needed to feel like a separate mood in there. We wanted it to feel kind of calmer and cooler and candlelit, even though the scene is set in the day. So we had to sort of figure out those sorts of things. And it's a sort of I think the Peggy Sue I loved as well, because it had a lot of structure to it, and a lot of the environments in the movie are obviously in the jungle and very organic, and that was uniquely challenging. And it was quite nice to have something like the treehouse to cling to, where you've got something solid that you can actually work with, because everything else is just so many leaves and branches, and trying to create nice compositions out of those was tricky. But the treehouse.
Sorry, and another interesting thing that Mike had to deal with, which made his job even trickier, in a way, is that Kirk and I and our very teeny little storyboarding team had to start storyboarding the film. We had to get sign-off on the animatic in order to go fully sort of into production and so on. So we didn't just have all the money sitting there. We had to, all the financiers had to approve that they liked the animatic in the film. before we could actually kind of make the colour version, if you like, and animate it. And which meant we had to storyboard stuff before Mike had production designed it. So it's really difficult because it's like filming actors in a room, but you don't know what the room is. So we essentially, you're talking about, the things on an envelope. I mean, we would sit down, Kirk and myself, day in and day out on Zoom and go, logically, he wakes up in a room, but he can't know he's in a treehouse. So there can't be a window that you can have a view out of in that room. Okay, logic point number one. He can't see the rest of the treehouse. It's got to be separate. But we do want a shot of him coming out and walking behind Kensuke. So that room must be there, but he can't see the balcony yet. And he can't. And we did this sort of crappy little thing on an envelope, which you inherited. But then, then you had to take that and actually kind of make it work in a real three-dimensional way, which was tough.
Yeah, that's it. You got to constantly have the story in mind because I think there was probably a bunch of early iterations of the treehouse that we had sort of, maybe we had rope bridges and multi-levels and all of these things. And because obviously, as a designer, you want to create something that's really magical. And obviously, the treehouse is like every designer's dream. You think, oh wow, that would be cool, and we'll do this and we'll do that, and then you just have to keep reminding yourself, like, does this serve the story? Does this serve the characters? And if not, then it just has to go. And actually, those constrictions are actually good, from a design point of view, because it sort of gets you to focus on the really important things. And it's still my favorite location. I love it.
Awesome. What would you say was a key element to your art direction that you wanted to enforce in every scene throughout the film?
I suppose it was that sort of that constant challenge of trying to find that blend between, photo real and graphic. And as Neil mentioned, it in an early sort of iteration, it was potentially going to be a live action film. I think there might have even been some idea about shooting it against model miniatures or something.
Our first attempt was to try and build miniatures for the backgrounds and then animate the characters on top, but it was too expensive.
Yeah, and but I sort of I took those ideas and then I sort of I looked at the mood board and all this sort of graphic realism stuff, and it was just this. There was a lot of interpretation required of the artists. Actually, it was challenging for everyone, and it was. There was no sort of magic button. We couldn't just say, look, this is exactly how you do this, because no sooner had you figured out one location, like, oh, okay, we've got jungle, we can do that now, and then you move it on to the beach, and you think, oh, no, bloody hell, we've got to sort out cliffs and rocks and sand, and every sort of type of texture had its own unique challenges, and, there's obviously multiple shots in the jungle when the poachers are chasing Tomodachi and Kikambo, and so it was just trying to sort of fine-tune that balance between photo real and graphic, which we were more successful than others, and in some locations than others, and then obviously you've got you've got the Peggy Sue, which is a very sort of man-made structure, versus the depths of the jungle, which is completely organic, and I needed to constantly make sure that the film had a sort of consistent art direction, but also that it was the characters felt like they had a dialogue with the background. It wasn't too jarring when you saw them together. So it was a constant playing with that dial and giving the artists a lot of sort of free rein to say, look, we haven't worked out every part, but let's work on it together. And it was a lot of I think the artists enjoyed that freedom as well.
Nice. Now we're moving on to animation. Yeah. So what was your pipeline like? What software did you use for animation and comp?
Well, for animation, we animated it all on TV Paint. All the character animation was done on TV Paint. You can talk about...
Yeah, we used Nuke for the compositing. The paint, ink and paint was TV Paint again. We also, the first sequence with at the start of the film at sea was using Unreal Engine for the water, which incidentally they gave us a funding as well.
Yeah, we had a grant from them.
Yeah, a grant from them to use it. So we tested it out in that. Not all the water was done like that. It was a lot of it was the CG was Maya. So yeah, I mean the tree house there, that was a mixture of Nuke, Maya, Photoshop, the whole gamut stuff like that.
Whatever we had.
Yeah, right. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, spitting all the bits up. And at Bumpy Box we used F-Track for the shot kind of logistics. So when I hand it out to artists, I would put it in their list, and it would appear in an online system, and they could see all the shots they were working on, launch them with the program they were needing, and work that way. Yeah.
Nice. How did you utilize the technology and various softwares to cut corners on the film?
Well, at the start of the R&D, when we started to get some shots through, I think it was the first, was the falling down when Michael's being chased. We got the first 3 or 4 shots we had, just to see how we were going to do all the shadows and stuff. And once you'd seen a few iterations of each scene, I started making tools and templates up for the compositors to use, which grew and grew and grew, and I built wrote documents to help them out with that. So that helped. Kind of, you got the original, the settings. You have to keep changing the settings every single time. It worked, for that. Depending on the close-up, if it was a close-up shot or further away, you'd have to adjust the parts. But that would help you a lot. It's having to rebuild every single comp over and over again. There was always like a basis template you could work from.
Nice. How long did you guys have for animation and comp in your schedule? I'm nosy because I work in production, so I like to know.
Not long enough. Gosh, how long were we animating for? About a year? Must have been a year because Assist was wrapping up and we still had to do colour and comp and...
Yeah.
Or a year and a half?
Year and a half,
God, I
maybe,
can't remember.
yeah.
Losing my mind. Not very long anyway. Year and a half of animation.
That's still good, but I understand not having enough time.
Yeah, I think comp was 8 months initially, and then it extended. Yeah.
Do you remember how many seconds per day for animation was done?
I think the production people were working on 6 seconds a week, I think was what they're aiming for.
Okay.
And sometimes, some people did way over that and some people did way under that, so it kind of averages out. But that's what we were aiming for.
Nice.
I think we had we tried to get 1 shot per compositor per day, but that would ramp up towards the end. And it was all, we also had to wait on assets coming in. So if we didn't have the background or the colours for a character hadn't been chosen yet or decided, we couldn't finish the shot. We could build it up as far as possible. But yeah, I think towards the end, it was like 1 per person per day. It all depends because some shots are 2 seconds to do. You can do it in an hour, and another ones would take months, to finish and get it through.
Nice. What was the #1 rule for your animators on this production in regards to how they approached their shots and animated the various human and animal characters?
Don't be cartoony. That's what we kept saying. We want to try and make a live action film, but it had to be... the example I always use is Michael's reaching for the berries and he slips and he falls. You had to feel that he could potentially break his leg and not that his head would roll off like Wile E. Coyote and he'd go and pick it up. You had to feel like they were... Sadly, although that might have been a quite interesting film. I don't know, maybe Kensuke too. But yeah, you go for naturalism and subtle performance, and we got any animators here, I don't know, but we got rid of... Are there animators here? Put your hands up. Okay. We got rid of... Animation people know what anticipates are. In cartoons, if somebody goes in a shock, they go first, and they kind of go down. They go down and then come up. And that's a lovely thing in, Bugs Bunny cartoon, but when you start playing it to these characters and Michael goes like that, it just looks stupid. So we kept saying, take the anticipates out so that Michael would just go like that, and it's just more naturalistic. So that's a technical animation geek thing for you.
Very nice. What is your favorite part about the comp process?
I think with the comp process, there's a couple of things. So on Kensuke's Kingdom, we had a lot of people, compositors who it was the first feature film, and they may have never worked on animation before, because the skill sets between an animated film and live action are quite different. They can cross over, but there's no green screen removal. There's no painting, and tracking. There can be some tracking, but it's not the same kind of tracking. So the skill sets of an animated feature can be more creative, and to have some of the juniors starting off, getting some shots done, and as they were getting and seeing them grow and getting more and more and building their skill set themselves, that was really rewarding to see that. And also an obvious one is we all work in, well, maybe not animation because they have some of the dialogue track. We technically don't have anything. F-Track sometimes would add on a version of the edit to our shots so we could see it, but it wouldn't be synced up properly. It'd been so many changes since it had been ingested into the system. So when you get a sequence with the music and the sound effects all put together, that's exciting because it's come to, you're like, oh, we're making a movie now. This is actually real, So yeah, that's
nice. It's my favorite part. It's like eye candy at the end of every production. You're like, we made this. Nice. So we're moving on to music and the voice cast, and then I'll open up to any questions from the audience. So here we go. So the music in the film was outstanding, and in my opinion, a main character in itself. It helped pull the entire story and look at the world seamlessly together. Did you have any initial direction for Stuart Hancock, or did you just trust him to go ham with it?
Well, that's interesting. Stuart, when I made this short film, The Last Bell, years ago, I looked for a composer for a year and a half, and I couldn't find one that was right for the film. And then, long story short, I found Stuart, and he did his first approach at the score and basically nailed it. He did 14 minutes worth of music in 3 weeks, and I had 3 notes, which he did in half an hour. I mean, they were teeny things. Oh. So we were very simpatico, and then I introduced him to Kirk, and Kirk did some commercials with him. So when we got this gig to do the film, I was like, we want Stuart. And which took a bit of fighting because he's not a particularly well-known name yet, but he will be. And so we had a relationship with him already. We knew we'd been through the process together. And then we did a teaser for this film to help try and raise the money, and Stuart wrote the music for that for nothing. I mean, he just did it as a favor because he wanted, to work with us. And funnily enough, he actually came up with the Kensuke, the Kensuke theme on our teaser. And when we came to do the actual film, he said, "Okay, what kind of themes are you going to do for us, Stuart?" And he said, "Well, I've done it already." Nice. So, but he's brilliant. I mean, there are lots of very good people. There are people that can write great tunes and great music, but what Stuart can do, which is very unusual, and the greats, John Williams and Jerry Goldsmith and so on could do this, is he can turn emotions on a penny. So he'll go from sad to happy to unsure to joy in a matter of seconds, and yet when you listen to it as a piece of music, it still totally works as a symphonic piece of music. It doesn't feel like it's jumping all over the place. So we got it anyway. We got him in. I mustn't ramble, but we got him in, and we said, okay, we want Stuart to be part of our animatic process. We're not going to do loads of dialogue. The music is a kind of voice in the film emotionally. So what we don't want to do, which is how most features are made, is that you make the feature and then in the last 6 weeks of post-production, some poor bastard's got to write, an hour of music in 6 weeks, and they sort of glue it over the film. So right from the beginning, as soon as we started storyboarding sequences, we'd just send them to Stuart, and he would start to tinker around with themes and send a piece of music back, and we go, wow, that inspires us to try this, and that would inspire the visuals, and then backwards and forwards it would go. So we were like this, the music was always, it grew at the same time as the imagery. So he was 100% with us all the way through the production, which was fabulous.
Fantastic. Now we're on to the voice cast. How was it like working with your star-studded cast? For me, notably Ken Watanabe. Were they all first choices?
They were all first choices. It was brilliant.
Nice.
I mean, we couldn't believe it. Yes, Sally, Ken, Raffi, Killian, of course, pre-Oppenheimer. Somebody wrote recently, because Oppenheimer came out and Kensuke came out at the London Film Festival, and they said, it's pretty amazing that Cillian Murphy has done 2 nuclear film roles this year, and by far the most harrowing is in Kensuke's Kingdom. Right? Yes. They were lovely. They all have very different ways to work. I always think as a director that working with actors is really, really similar to working with animators, because animators are actors essentially. So everyone needs to be talked to a different way, encouraged. Some people just want a bit of technical direction and they'll go with that. Other people want to talk about the emotion of it for half an hour, you know. Everyone needs a different kind of thing, and that's finding that out from your crew and working with them is the important thing. So the actors were much the same. But Aaron, who is, I can't call him little anymore because he's not, but he was 11 when we picked him to our brilliant casting director, Lucy Bevan, found him. We looked at about 50 kids, and he was by far the best. He's actually Scottish, broadly Scottish, but he can do a fabulous English accent, and he can just jump between the two. And the great thing about him was he just has none of the stage school theatricals, the kind of fakery of some kids that go to drama school and so on. He's entirely natural little boy, as he was then, but absolutely able to take direction and understand technically what was going on. And his mum came down to chaperone him, you know, when we were recording in London. And she was in another room writing some emails or something, and we were trying to get the sequence where Aaron is drowning, or where Michael is drowning out in the sea and calling out for Stella, Stella! And it was a tough thing to do, and we said, you know, I was saying to Kirk, you know, it would be great is if we could just pour water over his head. And Will Cohen, our sound designer, said, yeah, we could put some plastic down and pour water. And our producer going, you can't pour water over, you know, I mean, so we went through to Aaron's mum and we said, look, any chance we could waterboard your son? and she's tapping him and she went, oh yeah, no problem, like that. And she went back to her like that. So we went in there and put plastic sheeting over it and just tipped water over, and he went, Stella! like that. And he loved it, and he was totally up for it. So we did all that, and then there's a process called, as many of you may know, ADR, where the actors come in about a year later to do any extra change lines or effort noises, you know, like when they're lifting something up and you need a grunt or something like that. So we got Aaron back in a year later, and in that single year, we kind of said, bye, Aaron. He'd gone, bye! And then we said, hi, Aaron. He went, hi! And that was it. His voice had broken, and it was, we couldn't, we just, in the end, we couldn't use it because he's so lovely. He tried, but he just couldn't get it, and we couldn't repitch it. So everything you hear in there is what he recorded the first time.
Amazing. Thank you for sharing that. That's quotable. It's going to be on Instagram soon and Twitter. My final question for you guys. What are you all most proud of with this film?
Finishing it.
Yeah. I was going to say, is that a bad thing to say, finishing it? But I don't know. I think I think it's got a lot of beauty, a lot of integrity. I think we really tried to do something different, and it does stand apart from a lot of family films, I like to think. And I mean, apart from all the amazing work that the team did, and meeting all the amazing crew. I think I'm just most proud of the fact that, especially on animated film, when you sort of art direct or production design other projects that may be sort of CG or live action, in animation you're sort of almost every brushstroke is there to be seen on screen, and I feel like this project for me is sort of, I like to think it's got a lot of me in it, and for me that makes me very proud, because it's sort of all of the skills that I've built up over the years is sort of there to be seen on screen. And like other films, it can tend to drift off as it goes through all the various production processes. But this film is it means a lot to me personally, because it's sort of I like to think it represents me as well. But it's and it was just a joyous experience. And I've worked on lots of projects over the years, but when I look back, this will be one that really sticks in my memory, because it was just it was a joy to work on, and I just think it's a real work of art,
Yeah, working with Lupus, working with all the team at Bumpy Box, seeing them grow, seeing them going from never working on a shot before then to finishing. I'd try and give them some tricky ones, and so they could go away, and they all went off, all went on to other companies, and continued working in comp. And then it's seeing audiences watch the film and emote with it. I think that's a big thing, because they can easily we could finish it and everyone just stands and watches the film and then goes, oh, that looked nice. That was it. But when people get frights, Like one of my friends went to see it at the cast and crew one, and he screamed because he wasn't paying attention or something. He was looking at the background, and the bird flew out, and he was the only one who screamed, and then he hid. But yeah, see, people get, I'm not saying getting upset at the scenes, but a mother said, she's up there, she says, "Oh, it's very sad at that bit," and so it's obviously connecting with people. So that's good. That's the main thing as well.
And like I said before, I was surprised how emotional I got watching it this time again, and that's all down to Neil and Kirk's brilliant direction, just all of those, because when you're making it, obviously you're so sort of in the trenches with it that you tend not to sort of, remember the actual sort of the story part as much, because as an art director, I'm just thinking, I got to make this look as good as it can look. Whereas Neil and Kirk are obviously focused on the story, and now seeing it with fresh eyes, having had a break from it, it's just such a beautiful thing to watch again. So.
Yeah, the emotional connection. I've told the story a few times, but maybe the second or third screening I was at with a general audience, that weren't friends and family or anything, that didn't know the film, and people had begun to sort of cry. We noticed that some people would be in tears at the end of the film and so on, which was lovely. And there was a guy in his 30s or something there with his girlfriend, no kids, they were just a couple that had come to the film. And it was getting to a very sad point, I think maybe Tomodachi's funeral, after she shot. And this guy, I saw the silhouette of this guy 3 rows in front of me. I had to put the microphone down to do this. And he went like this. And he clearly didn't want his girlfriend to know. And it was all this nonsense just so he could do that. And I went, ha, gotcha. So it felt very, very good. But I must also say, not blowing smoke up these guys' backsides, but as a director, to work with phenomenally talented people. Kirk and I get a lot of attention because we're the directors, but you're only as good as your crew and your heads of department in particular. And these guys work so hard, and they have such incredible skills, which I certainly don't have. So to go into work every day and see to see your shots coming through from you and your crew, and to see the world of Kensuke's Island come to life, and the Peggy Sue and so on, was just how privileged am I? I mean, it's a fantastic job to have. So thank you, guys.
And I was also just going to say that it's really lovely. It's the first time I've watched it with an audience that haven't worked on the film, and it's lovely to hear people laughing at moments that you didn't expect them to laugh at, and then just at the end, where the family reunite. I had a bit of a tear on my eye. I thought, oh Christ, I got to go speak on stage now. So I was one of those then.
Amazing. Yeah, like I said, you guys should be really proud. It's a fantastic film.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you.
Well, thank you for coming.